Whatever happened to having a conversation with someone? Are we talking? Or arguing? Debating? Or bickering? It feels like there has been a shift in the way we speak to each other. Welcome to Confrontation to Conversation, your place for everything conversational and confrontational, where we find better ways to talk to each other. Now please give it up for your host, Galit Subin.
Welcome back to Confrontation to Conversation. I'm Galit Subin. Here in this podcast, we talk about a lot of different topics that tend to be controversial and tend to make people argue, debate, bicker. Today, our topic is going to be pride. What's the deal with pride? As someone who is a part of this community, the LGBTQ plus community, I have to say there's a lot of different conversations happening. Today we'll be talking about mainly kind of the history, different things that have happened, different laws that have changed because of this community and because of pride. I'm going to be focusing on specifically the United States, so let's dive right in. There was always people of this community since the beginning of time. It's not crazy to think that, it was Adam and Steve. There's always been stories. And not just of same-sex couples or relationships, but also of, you could say, androgynous figures in lots of different cultures. Doing my research, one of the more noted events in history was the earliest gay pride parade demonstration or marches. It was called Reminder Day Picket. This was happening in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania during 1968. So this was over 50 years ago. And back then, the concept of, pride wasn't even an idea. It definitely wasn't a month. It wasn't celebrated. It was, I guess you could say, frowned upon, even illegal. I mean, it was punishable in some cases. So in late 1960s, there were marches and different riots. Specifically, one of the well-known ones was Stonewall. It was a series, actually, of riots for gay liberation. And it took place over several days, beginning late June in 1969. What sparked all these riots was a police raid at Stonewall Inn, a gay bar, which was located in New York City, Manhattan. And it was not the first time that police had raided a gay bar. At first, it was more a protest than it was a celebration. Their goal was kind of to commemorate, Stonewall and all those different events that led up to that and what happened. The pride marches were mainly held in New York and Los Angeles, even Chicago. It is noted that transgender women and people of color were not there, excluded or silenced during the earlier marches, despite the initial riots largely consisting of them. Now, obviously, throughout these many, many years and decades, there have been important celebrities and figures that have changed conversations and many stigmas. Some notable names way back when, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. These were some of the many leaders of the Stonewall riots. But even after that, you could say different artists and musicians and actors and actresses, even let's say David Bowie. He really created this new way of dressing and really changed how men and how they typically dress. He wore many different, not just outfits, but costumes, and he became different characters. And some of them weren't very masculine. I think that really changed the way that people looked at him and saying, even though I'm a man, I don't have to dress like this or that. And being bisexual was such a new term for people to have to comprehend and have to understand. And now on to quote of the week. Now in this segment, I like to define a quote that represents the topic or subject that I'm talking about. And this can be from many different places. Sometimes it'll be from a movie or a TV show or from a celebrity. But today's quote comes from a 2009 period romantic drama titled A Single Man. Let's leave the Jews out of this just for a moment. Let's think of another minority. One that can go unnoticed if it needs to. There are all sorts of minorities, blondes, for example, or people with freckles. But a minority is only thought of as one when it constitutes some kind of threat to the majority. A real threat, or an imagined one. And therein lies the fear. If the minority is someone invisible, then the fear is much greater. That fear is why the minority is persecuted. So you see, there is always a cause. The cause is fear. Minorities are just people. People like us. And that was quote of the week.
Let's go, lesbians! Oh my god, lesbians. Lesbians, move out of my way. Rounding the corner with a bunch of lesbians. Here we are, Manhattan. Can you handle it?
Now we're going to talk about the current situation and the debates that are happening within this community or around this community. Since 1969, it has drastically changed in many different ways, in good ways and in bad ways, you could say. It is, now not seen as a mental health disorder, and it's not illegal. There's way more freedom and openness and acceptedness. However, nowadays, we do have pride marches and we're celebrating it now. We're not protesting it as much, which is great. However, the topic has changed from just basic human rights to now many different things, because now there are different pronouns and there's different conversations about gender and about biological sex, and all of these things are genuinely different conversations to be having, because when it started, it was just about a woman wanting to kiss another woman or marrying another woman, or a man wanting to marry another man. It was not something so crazy to comprehend. I mean, maybe back in the day, sure, it seemed crazier, but now there are these other conversations that are surrounding this community, but I don't believe are genuinely related to the LGBTQ plus community. For example, there's this whole debate about whether trans women should be allowed to compete with biological women. There's that conversation. And then there's, the whole pronoun thing with non-binary and with it being taught in schools, and there's just so many different conversations that are happening, but are almost happening at the same time, as if they're all gonna have the same outcome. Teaching LGBTQ plus stuff in schools to children. That is not the same argument. People are finding that the common denominator and the common enemy and the opposition is the LGBTQ plus community by saying either the Olympics or the schools or the pronouns or this and that. Now, obviously, in a way, yes, it is the common denominator in these debates and these conversations. But what's not the common denominator is the way that we fix these problems. The way that we fix these problems is not by antagonizing this one community and saying every one of this type or this is that way and agrees with this, right? I think a lot of the time, the more extreme people of a certain community they're the loudest. They're the loudest, and they're going to be the most heard within that community. And when they're heard, the people who are against them are only seeing them. And I think that's a huge problem, and I think that's mainly what's happening in this conversation, in this argument. What's happening is we're tackling all these same arguments with the same logic and with the same resentment towards how... Now, obviously, this is such a vast... and I think that it's important to realize that each of these debates is its own specific debate, and each one should have different outcomes. Whatever they may be, they aren't the same, problems aren't the same, and the solutions should not be the same. That's why I think it's important to understand what exactly it is we're talking about and make sure that we're talking about the same thing, because sometimes you start to bring in other aspects of different things that don't necessarily relate to the subject. So if we're talking about how schools are teaching kids these kinds of things, don't go into bringing, the Olympic situation into it, because that's an entirely different thing. And I think we need to start tackling each debate in its own rightful manner so that we can better understand that there's no way to find a solution when you're arguing about different things or blending two different things that don't correspond with each other. Now, I would like to introduce my guest. Her name is Sarah, a young 16-year-old student, and I'm kind of just asking her what her thoughts are on the subject of, number one, I guess pride in general. Number two would be what she thinks about the whole situation regarding schools teaching LGBTQ plus stuff in school. So, welcome, Sarah.
Hi, it's Sarah Rosenberg, and I'm going to be talking about my opinion on gay pride. I fully support I Am an Ally, but I don't think it's necessary to be teaching kids about it at a very young age, like how they're doing in America. And also, I don't know if you guys know about the Target scandal, but Target just put out a line for kids of just fully gay pride stuff. And I don't think that's necessary. Like, I do love that they're supporting, but it's just like, I feel like you're throwing that on kids, and I don't think that's necessary. I do think it's necessary that teachers do teach kids about, like, parents, that some kids have one daddy, some people have two daddies, some people have two mommies and one mommy. Like, I do think that's necessary to be teaching in schools, but at a certain age where they can understand, I don't think it's necessary for them to be learning when they're in kindergarten.
A lot of the time, we forget to think about what's actually happening and thinking about it in reverse so that we can say, and you don't have to agree with them, but I think it's important if you want to even see a small change. I think the place to start is not ignoring what the other side has to say. It's more listening to it, taking it in, analyzing it, and thinking to yourself, is this okay? Is this right? Maybe I can change this instead. I think if you really want to have change in something or really create a change and have an effect on something, then it might be the best option to take a step outside of the argument, of the debate, and collect all the information, collect all the things that are actually happening, that you are seeing, that you know is happening. You're able to look at it and analyze it and reflect on it and then say to yourself, okay, now I see from the outside of what's really going on. And you can take a moment to yourself and really think about what it is that you really think that should be changed. And then go back into it and say, okay, I see what you're saying. I looked it over. I thought it over. And I really think this one thing, though, is really important. And I think that it should be or shouldn't be changed, like whatever it may be. And you just listen to them and you gather what they're saying. And then maybe you even take another step back and then gather your stuff, your information, and their information. The things that they want to change and the things that you want to change. Maybe somewhere in that big mix of stuff, there is one thing that is agreed upon, or is something that you can talk about and have a real conversation about rather than arguing, and then figure out a way to find or reach some middle ground. You're not going to be able to truly get the attention of your opponent or the opposition, whatever it is. We assume that we're not going to like what they're going to say, so we don't listen. And then we kind of automatically assume that they already said it and that they did say it. So I think it's important to listen the most, because when you're listening, that means the other person is talking or the other side is talking. They're saying stuff. And that's important, that you really know what it is that they're trying to change. Because if you don't know what they're trying to change, then you can't argue against them, because you're not arguing against anything. You're just arguing against the various things that you assume that they're trying to change. So it's always the best to just kind of wait a second, listen to what they really, really want, and listen to all the things that they're using to back themselves up and to understand where they're coming from, just to kind of hear what they're saying. Even if it's offensive, even if it's stupid, even if it's annoying and it's wrong, if you listen to them, maybe you'll find one thing that you can agree on, or one thing that you can talk about, that you could maybe find a middle ground. Alrighty, now it is time to wrap up this episode of Confrontation to Conversation. We talked a lot about the history of Pride, where it came from, what really, really started these parades. And then we kind of talked about recent years and what's changed within the community and new terms. And then we had some interesting insights from someone who is still currently in high school, I think, which is really important. And then we kind of talked about how to really figure out what it is that, we want to change, or I want to change, or you want to change, and how to get there and how to get your message across if it really is something that's important. And if you believe that there's something happening that you really don't think is okay and you think is wrong, how to best approach that topic and that debate, that argument, and how to find some kind of middle ground. And that's about it. Thank you guys for listening. This is my first episode of Confrontation to Conversation, and if you enjoyed it, and if you would like to see or hear more, I should say, you can go to my website, which is gsubin, that's gsubin.com, and it has my information. It has my Instagram for the podcast, it has my YouTube for the podcast, and it has lots of different stuff. So if you want to contact me, you can contact me through there. And I think that's it. So I'm gonna wrap up. I want to say thank you for listening. Yeah, it's been Confrontation to Conversation, episode 1 with Galit Subin. See ya.
Blah 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 blah.